Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Great America Show. It's great to have you with us today. Just a moment, we're going to be joined by a very special guest, a man that you probably all know on this show, whether you've seen him on this show or with the great Lou Dobbs or with the great Joe Rogan. He makes his rounds, and he makes himself very available for the American people to know what's going on, specifically in the cybersecurity world, but in a broader aspect as well. The great Mike Benz is going to be with us in just a moment. Some news of the day: President Trump unrelenting on 60 Minutes and their Marxist ideology. President Trump saying they managed to mention his name every 60 seconds on the network. Now, I haven't fact-checked him, but the chances are he's probably right. The Trump derangement syndrome in the mainstream media, the left-wing media, is out of control, to say the least. Vladimir Zelensky over the weekend saying President Trump must head to Ukraine if he wants a peace deal? Who the hell does Zelensky think he is? Unbelievable. And the tariffs on China. We're going to take all this up with the great Mike Benz. I don't want to waste any more time. I want to bring in Mike. Mike, terrific seeing you over the weekend. Let's start with that, the UFC event. The reaction to President Trump, the people seeing President Trump. It was like something I've never seen before. I've been to a lot of sporting events. You probably have. Have you ever seen anything like it?
I haven't, and it was President Trump, Elon Musk, the Secretary of State, the Director of National Intelligence, the FBI Director, the HHS Secretary. You could have a cabinet meeting at fight night, which was just super cool to see. Yeah,
and the rousing applause for all of them. It wasn't, I didn't hear a boo. I'm sure you didn't hear a boo. Not that you'd be able to hear a boo, but it was just unbelievable. And President Trump, another one, like you, makes himself so readily available. Doesn't hide from anything. This weekend, he released his medical results for his yearly medical. I mean, the man's as healthy as a bull. How the hell does he do it?
Honestly, I think Trump needs to be at some point before he passes on to the next life cryogenically frozen and studied for generations. You know, we do this gain-of-function freak medical research to build superviruses, but if we could do some sort of medical research on how a man is able to have the energy of a 50-year-old at 80, is able to have perfect health, is able to beat coronavirus simply by staring at it long enough, can go on 3 hours of sleep, can eat nothing but McDonald's cheeseburgers and Diet Cokes. He's built different. Yeah,
the testing, you're absolutely right. I mean, the Beagle testing, the money they spent, we're going to get into that right now, the USAID money and all the wasted government money that we're now finding out. It's like you couldn't write the most crazy book in the world, Mike, and the shit that's coming out right now be in it. USAID, I was telling you before we sat down here, USAID has funded just about everybody but you and I. How have we gotten to this spot, this point in society, in our government, Mike, that we're funding circumcisions in Uzbekistan and Sesame Street in Afghanistan? I mean, at what point do you think it came to that in this country where we said we're just going to pay for everything?
I think it started in 1948 in full. We're a nation of secrets. We are an empire built on secrets that have to be kept from the American people, because if the American people find out, then our foreign adversaries or foreign governments find out. And so in order to maintain the empire that we have acquired through subterfuge and covert action, we need to not just keep our enemies and neutrals disinformed or uninformed. We need to keep the American people as well, so that they don't talk about it or it's not reported in our press, because everybody else in the world reads our press. And so this started in 1948 when the World War II ended, and we were setting up this new world order, the rules-based liberal international order, with the UN, with NATO, with the World Bank, with the IMF, the international finance system. And that also barred, under the UN Declaration on Human Rights, it barred military accession of territory. So everything had to move towards elections, and everything had to move towards hearts and minds work to influence the millions of people who live in each country, so that you can take it over in the form of political vassalage rather than military control. So that's why the CIA was set up under the 1947 Act, It's a State Department function. There was a lot of talk at the time in the State Department about how to structure this CIA function. And the CIA was doing, all this sort of dirty work in terms of political meddling and funding institutions, funding charities, funding unions, funding media organizations. They got in a lot of trouble in the 60s and 70s. USAID was created in 61 to be so while CIA was a plausible deniability layer for the State Department, USAID was a plausible deniability layer for the CIA. And then that spandreled out. In 1983, the National Endowment for Democracy was created, which was a plausible deniability layer for USAID. And so we have, and all of these touch every institution in society, and it gets to a point where you really can't point saying, I wonder how many governments have been overthrown by the CIA, to preserve the tuna,
Right.
and lo and behold, even things like fishing and whatnot play into whether or not a country like Norway joins the EU or something. And so every industry has money associated with it, and that money, whoever, the winners of the markets are the people who have governments and intelligence agencies on their side, which is why every major company touches the government, whether, yeah.
No, I just, it's so unimaginable that it's come to this point. I mean, some of the craziest things being funded by these people, but the outrage is what's so alarming to me. You see these and it's mostly Democrats who are just absolutely going berserk. Like they are gung-ho, hate Elon Musk, want the man dead. I don't know if you saw recently, there was a poll out justifying that President Trump could be assassinated. It's fine, that it's justifiable. If it happens, it happens. Now, it's no joke, Mike, because we still don't know who took a shot at President Trump. We know what they tell us, that it was this guy, Matthew Cooks. They cremate this guy's body. That's unimaginable, like I've ever seen before. But we don't know the true story about what happened behind this man. We still haven't heard anything. We have the guy who was going behind the fence at Trump's golf course, who was apparently trying to buy rocket launchers from Ukraine to blow up his plane or blow up his motorcade. Yet we have these Democrats who are gung-ho that USAID is great and that we should continue to keep giving and giving and giving. Are you as surprised as I am that they've taken their masks off? And it's not just USAID, Mike. It's them wanting to bring back in MS-13 members who were deported. Are you as surprised as I am that they've gone this far left, that they've committed? And Lou Dobbs used to say, once you cross the penumbra, you can't come back. Are you as surprised as I am that they've went this far to take the mask off?
I think it's to be expected. This is existential for them. And frankly, I actually don't think most Democrats really care or even know about USAID and what it does. What you have is an astroturfed protest movement, which is the same thing the blob does everywhere. I mean, it's literally part of a stock standard playbook for how to organize a color revolution, how to bring down a democratically elected government, a popular democratically elected government. And you'll notice that one of the things that Chuck Schumer and Senator Chris Murphy talk about is the need to drive down Trump's approval ratings.
Right.
It's a when you see messaging like that it's not about building up support for themselves. They need to find a way to make the president unpopular. You have to understand this is part of a destabilization effort that is stock standard, and that's why you see these highly astroturf protests. You go to these protests with a mic and a camera, and you ask these people what they're protesting for. They can't even tell you.
And they cover their faces.
Right. The stuff is sponsored. Everyone's getting reimbursed for what they do. Yep. I covered one case of this guy, Carlos Alvarez, who claimed credit for the idea of these Tesla takedown protests. And he said at his at one of the rallies that he needs to be able to say that he bankrupted Tesla or that he helped bankrupt Tesla in order to get his next job.
Oh my goodness.
So think about what that says. In order to get your next job, you need to have on your resume that you bankrupted Tesla. That means you're being hired because of that. That means that someone is paying you, sponsoring you. And you trace the networks, and the same guy co-founded one of the censorship projects with Nina Jankovic, the DHS disinformation governance czar, who herself was funded by USAID through the Center for Information Resilience when she had to register as a British agent after her time at DHS as part of this British influence operation. Her name was in the Integrity Initiative files, which was another British intelligence busted operation from 2015 to 2019. She had worked for NDI, the National Democratic Institute, which is the DNC branch of the CIA.
And what was this woman's name?
Nina Jankovic.
Nina Jankovic.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say is this is all the same foreign policy establishment who's astroturfing domestic disturbances in order to try to topple the government, which is their paid vocation, their professional set of skills doing around the world on USAID dime.
And a name that you always hear about, which up until maybe last year you weren't allowed to say his name, George Soros. What role is he playing in this right now? And maybe not so much him, but his son, Alex Soros, who's married to Huma Abedin. The other thing, Mike, that's so surprising to me is that you hear the regurgitation of like 15 of the same names constantly. Jake Sullivan, Susan Rice, or, you know, it's like the same regurgitation of names, like there's not a few billion people living in the world. What role is Soros playing in I mean, he's always destabilized countries, but right now, specifically, as it pertains to President Trump and Tesla?
Well, George Soros is the top donor drafter on the Democrat side. And I always describe the structure of the blob as being the inside of it is the State Department, the Pentagon, the intelligence community, and then right in between is USAID. That's the government, the sort of guts, the center of the blob. Underneath that, you have the NGOs, and you have the civil society partners, who are the spandrels of the State Department, the Pentagon, the CIA, and USAID. That you know, sort of like tree roots, tentacle out into the world. Tens of thousands of them, hundreds of thousands of them. On top of the government side of the blob is the donor drafter class, and by donor drafter I mean these are very high net worth individuals or multinational corporations or hedge funds that donate into the political campaigns of the and therefore get access to personnel to determine who is actually running CIA, who is actually running state, who is actually running Pentagon, who's actually running USAID, because that's basically the deal that you make with donors is they pay you a lot of money, they get a say over how you staff your the agencies, and personnel is policy. So it's not really about what you run on, it's about who is actually at the agency doing what they do. And I call them donor drafters because you can think of it like a bike race. In a bike race, the best strategy is not to be out front the whole race where you are bearing the full force of the wind. The best strategy in a bike race is to be right behind the guy and who's cutting the wind for you. And so what you have in this donor drafter class are people who co-invest with USAID, co-invest with the State Department in all of their operations. They also pay for the political campaigns, and then their own personal interests draft off of the battering ram of what state and CIA and USAID and Pentagon do. So, for example, ExxonMobil will make political contributions to a particular candidate. They will get a say over, for example, Rex Tillerson was the Secretary of State for Donald Trump. The State Department will then go in and fund NGOs. It will do diplomacy with foreign countries. It will open up the oil and gas lines, and ExxonMobil will make banks. So they've both donated into the government pool of money, and they are drafting off of what the State Department does. So there's essentially a battering ram that knocks open the door for this financial and corporate class to operate. And you see the same thing with Soros. You know, he didn't just luck his way into $38 billion at the Open Society Foundation. His personal investments profit massively off of the operations that he donates into and drafts off of. Can I give a few examples of this to flesh this out? So, for example, George Soros bought a large stake in Halliburton and then campaigned on expanding NATO, and Halliburton holds the contracts with Naftagaz to process the oil and gas and shale in Ukraine. George Soros, there was a famous case in the 1990s where George Soros was supporting the Clinton administration as they were privatizing the Russian state-held assets after the end of the Cold War. And the other partner of George Soros at that time was a group called the Harvard Institute for International Development.
Go figure.
If that name sounds familiar, it's a parallel with the U.S. Agency for International Development. And in fact, the Harvard Institute for International Development got $500 million from the U.S. Agency for International Development to travel to Russia and to help them sell off all of these previously state-held assets by the Soviet Union in fire sale prices to Western investors in the Wall Street, London class. And because they were on the ground and doing these auctions through the USAID money, they held closed auctions where the only two outside investors who were allowed to actually purchase these newly privatized assets of the Soviet Union were the Harvard Institute for International Development, the Harvard Endowment, and George Soros' Quantum Fund. So they helped topple the Soviet Union. You can say that was a very good thing, but the fact is they did. They got money from USAID to rip the country apart and sell off all its assets to foreigners. Right. And in exchange for that, they got to make bank because they had private exclusive access to all of those to all of those assets. And you see the same thing everywhere. Right. In Ukraine, George Soros is massively active in Ukraine. And what are they doing? They're selling off every aspect of Ukraine. It's oil, it's gas, it's minerals, it's agriculture to these Wall Street investment firms and to these large banks and multinational corporations. And so they're on both sides of it. And Soros does that same thing with the State Department, does the same thing with NATO, does the same thing with the IMF and the World Bank. And it's basically the ultimate insider trading card because you know exactly what to invest in. And you know it's going to be a safe bet because it's backed by the full force and credit of the U.S. military, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the State Department, as long as the wrong person doesn't get elected. Right. And they ran into Trump getting elected.
Per se, a brick wall. I want to talk about NGOs, but you brought up a really interesting point, the rare earth minerals. I'm convinced, Mike, that the reason Vladimir Zelensky made that whole little scene, and it's being reported places, in the White House and stormed off without signing anything, is because he's already sold off his rare earth minerals to, I think they said England was one of the places. What's your thoughts on that? Because something doesn't smell right. Now, the guy is an oligarch. He's a dictator, in my opinion, Zelensky. Won't hold elections, tells Donald Trump, you got to come to my country if you want peace. Donald Trump should tell him to go to hell. You clearly don't want peace in your country. So he comes to America, he does that whole little song and a dance, and he storms off. What was behind that? Do you think he's already sold off the rare earth minerals for Ukraine?
Well, there's a lot of rare earth minerals, so I doubt that he's sold them all off. But
what America would want? Right.
Well, the UK side of this is really fascinating, and I wish that there was more investigative reporting on this piece because I have long been fascinated with the UK role, which I think in many respects may actually be more dominant than the U.S. role in Ukraine. You know, there's a famous saying about NATO. It was by Lord Ismay, who was the first Secretary General of NATO. It's actually on NATO's website right now if you go to their About History section. And this is a famous quote by him where he said, the purpose of NATO is to keep the Americans in, the Russians out, and the Germans down. Now, if you think about that framing, that's basically calling NATO a British institution designed to get America to fight its wars, designed to, to keep Russia, boxed out and contained, and to stop Germany's rise as and there's always been this sort of industrial war with Germany since the end of World War II, and I'm very interested in the first part of that because what you see, go back to Russiagate and how it started with Christopher Steele and the British intelligence agent, who it's now come out in the Crossfire Hurricane documents that were just released this past week, that when Christopher Steele was interviewed by the FBI, he said that he was doing this in addition to serving his client, Hillary Clinton. He was doing this because Trump was, quote, his main opponent, because his foreign policy would undermine British interests. It would undermine the U.S.-UK special relationship and the British interests of that. So You have the origins of Russiagate being essentially a British intelligence operation to stop Trump from enacting a foreign policy vis-a-vis NATO, because that was the big thing in 2016, is Trump was going to get us to leave NATO and going to end military support for Ukraine. Because remember, this war did not start in 2022. It started in 2014 when we overthrew that government. And we're not expecting the counter coup. And then we were funding the reconquest of those territories in the East. And with Trump pledging neutrality on that, the British interests were massively threatened. After the Cold War, all of these British companies and banking interests and their portfolio companies made a massive play for Eurasia, which is, the heart of this big new Brzezinski. It's the world island. It's where 2/3 of the world's critical minerals are, and a huge portion of it's oil and gas. And it looked like that was possible in the 1990s when we won the Cold War to effectively, colonize Eurasia and install puppet presidents everywhere, like we did with Boris Yeltsin in the 1996 election and before that. And so all these British banks and British companies like Shell and British Petroleum, who figure very heavily in this, Shell signed a $10 billion deal with Naftogaz, the largest state-owned gas company in Ukraine. In 2013, I believe, is when Shell signed that $10 billion. And then those investments effectively went to zero when the places that they had the mining rights and became occupied by the Russians in the Donbass, which is where most of the shale is, as well as offshore in Crimea. In 2014, when Crimea became annexed and when the Donbass declared themselves breakaway states, suddenly Naftogaz could not, exploit those regions, and so the co-investors were all holding empty bags unless the U.S. military went in there and reconquered those territories. And so you have a British operation to get America to war. I mean, this is very similar to how World War I, the U.S. involvement in World War I. And the fact is I believe that there is just an incredibly shocking degree of British manipulation of U.S. opinion about the war. Every single person in the blob of any consequence seems to come up through some sort of British influence node, whether they spend a summer at the London School of Economics or Oxford, or they're in some a fellowship with Chatham House or one of the other NGOs or universities or think tanks of British origin. And we call this a special relationship, but it's especially toxic for the United States because we fought a war of independence against the British dominating U.S. affairs, and I think something similar is playing out vis-a-vis Ukraine and Russia. So I don't know in particular at the root of it how much of it has already been sold off to the Brits, but I would not be surprised if something like that were to be reported.
You're still looking good.
I'm still feeling good. I've got all your MyPillow products. Mattress topper, bed sheets, MyPillows, towels, slippers, blankets.
I'm interrupting this commercial to do something I've never done before. Get 2 MyPillows absolutely free on orders of $100 or more. I can't do this forever, so get on board with this great sale today. Our best-selling 6-piece bath towel sets or kitchen towel sets, just $29.98. Our famous standard MyPillows only $14.98. Queens $18.98. King size only $1 more. Body pillows $29.98. Multi-use MyPillow 2.0s with pillowcase $9.98. Save $40 on our Spring Percale and Giza Dream bed sheet sets. Any size, any color. So go to MyPillow.com or call that number on your screen. Use your promo code to save up to 80% on all MyPillow products. And when you spend $100 or more, get 2 standard MyPillows absolutely free.
Going back to the broader how this thing started, and that's a lot of things that people don't realize is that it really did start in 2014. What people don't talk about, and what you don't hear the mainstream media talking about, is how NATO has expanded since 1990, right? There was a deal made between Baker and Mikhail Gorbachev that it would not extend further east from Germany. Mike, time and time, and this is an unpopular opinion if you're talking to the left and the mainstream media, but time and time again, we've disobeyed, and we've continued to move further to the east up until the point of about to be Ukraine, which would have been on the border of Russia. How is Russia, now I'm not defending Vladimir Putin by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm saying looking at a broad base, what would you expect any other, if it wasn't Russia, say it were Australia, where Russia is right now, what would you expect Australia to do, Mike, if you've told them for the last 30 years, 30 plus years, that we're not moving further east, but we've continued to lie? What do they expect next is coming when you've lied to them about expansion of territory? What can they expect next? Do you understand my rationale of thinking? What would any normal person do?
Well, you know what this is. They did it because they thought they could get away with it.
Yeah, well, that too.
And there's, when you fold the country into NATO, the conditions for joining NATO is that you privatize your markets, right. You adjust your rule of law, you form all of this interconnectivity, and you effectively become absorbed into the Borg. And so, and a lot of that means, excising the influence of Russia, for example. This is why, all these NATO countries, since, the late 1990s, were former Soviet bloc countries. And the goal is to seize Eurasia. Right. Russia itself sits on $75 trillion worth of natural resources, the most of any country in the world by far. It's all underexploited, but all it takes is if you can have a puppet president in there and you can regime change it and you can continue the work that was done in the 1990s under Yeltsin, that would make the U.S. and U.K. wealthy beyond anything ever conceived of by man. And so that is the prize. And this has been the long road to Damascus, so to speak, to try to make that happen by folding every sequential country into NATO. But they weren't expecting the resistance that happened. It started with this 2014. That was really the first time that Russia punched back, so to speak, by sort of backstopping the Donbass and Crimea secession. And now we're in this world where we're confronted with, are we still the unipolar power that can singularly do anything we want with no pushback from any other country? I think we've found out and been somewhat humbled in the past decade that is no longer the case. And frankly, that power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. The fact is it only got this bad. I think when James Baker and everyone involved in the early 1990s, pledges to Gorbachev and whatnot, I don't think that it was easy to make that statement because the unipolar moment had not yet fully made itself manifest. Right. But as that snowballed, it became like stepping on a bug. Well, is it the right or wrong thing to do if it wasn't aggressing on you? Doesn't matter. It's a bug. Yeah. And that's the way they saw the Soviets. That's the way they saw the Russians. That's the way they saw the Belarusians. It's the way they saw everyone living in the stands. Basically, everybody east of Germany was basically just a bug. And you better be absorbed into our diet, or you're going to end up on our windshield anyway as we drive at you. But the fact is this was an incredibly corrupt process, and it's tied right back to Soros as well. Soros wrote a book in 1995 called The Future of NATO about, or maybe it was 1993, and this was right before he basically advocated for. Remember, NATO never fired a bullet. Until 1995. Right. They formed in 1949. They went 46 years as a defensive alliance without ever having to fire a bullet in defense. The first kinetic action they took was offensive action. That's all they've ever done. And so the fact is NATO obviously should have gone away after the Cold War. It was set up specifically for that. Mm-hmm. They hemmed and hawed and said, actually, well, while we've got this gigantic transatlantic military force set up, let's use it to be the battering ram of empire acquisition. And that's all it's been from Iraq to Afghanistan to Libya to Yugoslavia. But the fact is it's if other countries have power and agency, there's probably nothing more offensive and existential and consequential than a rival military threatening to kill you.
Yeah.
And we've unleashed this, and I think Trump is trying to redraw the alliance map. There's no reason that we can't be allies with a lot of our adversaries and restore trade relations and have prosperity for all. The only people who lose from that are the multinational corporations who have bet on those adversarial relationships, netting them resources or deals, and the defense contractors who were a huge part of the lobbying force for the expansion of NATO. There's an incredible set of contemporaneous reporting that was dug up by Kaneko the Great on X.
He's great.
Yeah, it just goes through just reel after reel of how all the Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and they were just lobbying, spending hundreds of millions of dollars on Congress to authorize and support NATO expansion. And that's what we're up against now, and we'll see if we can pull off peace.
Think about how many corporations, the good corporations too, by good I mean bad, that would go out of business if we had world peace and we'd lived by a message that you just relayed. I want to take a trip east now to China. By the way, going back to Russia real quick, I say it all the time. Think about how nice it would be if we could normalize relations with them and have trade, like you said. There would essentially be world peace because now China and Russia are separated. Iran doesn't make a move. North Korea, I don't think they'll ever make a move, but they don't make a move. So if you can normalize relations with Russia, think about the world peace it would create. So now speaking of China, I mean, Xi Jinping is losing it. I think he's losing his country. He's losing his people. They rely heavily on coal imported. They rely on food. They can't self-sustain, right? They need the rest of the world to keep them going. But they've run into a hacksaw right now, and that hacksaw is Donald Trump. Xi Jinping, like I said, I think is losing his mind. Corporations are going to start to leave. You see NVIDIA today comes out and says they're going to start building these super chips here in America. Mike, I didn't think I'd ever see the day that we'd hear. Now, we'll wait and see if it happens, but even hear those words that we'll be able to do that. You see ships sitting in Beijing right now, over in China, that are docked because we've canceled orders. I think what Donald Trump is doing is excellent. I think he should go as hard as he possibly could. I don't necessarily agree with lifting the tariff ban on phones and computers. I think China needs to feel the wrath 100% and feel the pain 100% for them to realize that we're not the walking pad anymore. We're not the doormat anymore. How do you think this plays out now, short term, over the next few weeks to months to years? What the ball's in China's court? What do they do?
The alliance map is being redrawn right now.
For sure.
And I do believe that the scale of Chinese influence on our Congress, on our sort of shadow cabinet right now, is still something that's not really made clear to the American public in the way that it needs to be. I mean, when you look at the China relationships with the First Family and the Biden administration, and Hunter Biden having the head of Chinese intelligence as a client and getting $10 million, from these, various consulting and brokering deals, selling off LNG ports to Chinese investors and working closely with Chinese energy companies. And you look at something like the Bush-China Foundation, which I believe was Neil Bush. This was set up right as Trump had won the 2016 election. The Bush-China Foundation is a parallel track diplomacy for high-level GOP officials to have dual-track diplomacy with the CCP and to further business entanglements with China. And it was set up explicitly to counter the elected president's, hawkish position towards China.
Right.
And, this is because the GOP was the big business party that was its way of, the Democrats had Hollywood, media, universities, unions, and basically the Republicans had the energy companies, the defense contractors, and the Chamber of Commerce, the big business companies, and that was always sort of what kept parity between the two sides. And Trump sort of ran over both when he beat both a Bush and a Clinton to become president in 2016. And so, you see this on both sides of the aisle, this lobbying mechanism to keep the trade relations with China going. And I can understand how it's a shock to a business when you lose, what in some cases is your largest market or a place that you're reliant on for some aspect of the supply chain. But the fact is we had a heartland in this country, and it was carved up. And it was carved up in large part because the multinational corporations here in the U.S., which were the pride and joy of American economic dominance, the middle-class miracle in the 20th century, it was all carved up and hollowed out when multinational corporations who have no allegiance to the U.S., they're multinational, and use this sort of Milton Friedman-esque maximize total shareholder value. It doesn't matter what's good for the country. What matters is what's good for the shareholders. And what's good for the shareholders is cheap labor from China, is putting our factories in China, and so there go the factories, there go the jobs, and then there go all of the towns and all of the buildings and all the life that you've set up in the middle of our country. And so obviously the purpose of this tariff war is to try to force, onshoring and of those, to try to bring back the American manufacturing miracle. It's amazing, as you mentioned. NVIDIA is now pledging $500 billion worth of investment, and we've seen a lot of other countries do this. But the fact is in terms of how China will respond, a lot of this is going to depend on what happens in Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia, because just like you said, there's no reason that we can't be allies with Russia against China. In fact, the blob's maximum pressure campaign on Russia drove Russia into an alliance with China. Russia, the whole plan with Burisma and NAFTA gas and this Grand Ukraine energy play that I talk about to bankrupt Russia because its major export is energy, oil and gas, and its largest market coming into the war and coming into 2014 was Europe. The whole plan was if you can get rid of their exports to Europe, you kill the Russian economy. They can no longer fund a war machine. They'll be sitting ducks. We will fund a revolution within the country to topple their government. They'll have no money to fight back against us. And then, boom, we win Eurasia. Risk game is over.
Right.
The problem is we cut Russia off of Europe. And what do? They built something called the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline. We blew up the Nord Stream pipeline.
No, we didn't do that.
I'm sorry. Ukrainian intelligence.
I heard if you saw Scott Bessent with Tucker Carlson, and Tucker goes, "Yeah, we blew up the Nord Stream," and Scott Bessent keeps talking, and Tucker goes, "Yeah, we blew up and Scott Bessent just starts laughing. I mean, how much more obvious could it have been, Mike?
Oh no, I mean, I saw it coming a mile away. They were talking about doing this in 2015 or 2018, I guess, with the Skripal poisoning in the UK. And I found the Integrity Initiative documents that showed a British plan to parlay the Skripal poisoning into a way to shut down the Nord Stream pipeline. And I thought one of these things is not like the other, and this is a long time coming on that. But the fact is that was supposed to bankrupt Russia when we did that. Instead, now China gets all the cheap gas instead of Europe, and not only that, I believe one of the main tactical issues that the Trump admin has to thread here is the EU-China relationship.
Right.
Because this could be very, very nasty. If a new alliance map is drawn where the U.S. becomes closer to Russia, but the EU becomes closer to China, that would be a massive problem. You don't want to lose Europe on the way to patching this up. The problem is the EU blob is wholly invested in the Seize Eurasia policy against Russia.
Right.
And so we're running into that on the NATO side. We're running into that on the British statecraft side, and in the French, have just arrested Marine Le Pen, who was up by something like 11 points in the early opinion polls. for 2027. She's now banned from running there. She was running on removing France from the integrated military command of NATO, just like Charles de Gaulle did before he was the plots against him. And so, Europe also is passing these censorship laws that are just devastating to U.S. social media companies here in the U.S., affecting U.S. citizens.
But Mike, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. The craziest part about it all is we set the stage for all of this. America set the stage for the censorship back here in 2016, 2020, when Donald Trump was deplatformed. We set the stage for arresting our political opponents in 2023 when Donald Trump was indicted 150 million times, faced 700 years in jail. Isn't that so sad to see that the greatest country for freedom, set the stage to arrest political opponents, to not run, to censor people on social media and arrest them? Isn't that sick and sad as an American to be sitting here talking about it?
Of course, although we set that stage actually in Central and Eastern Europe before we brought it to Trump in 2016. So that sort of gets to this transatlantic nature of the blob that you have. It was censorship came to the U.S. in 2016 and afterwards because of the hybrid warfare doctrine that NATO had created after the 2014 Crimea disaster and the Donbass breakaways. This hybrid warfare was this new NATO concept that the nature of war had changed, and that it's all about hearts and minds and the media, and so the military has to play an active role in controlling the media and social media in order to win elections, to stop pro-Russian candidates from winning. And then they brought that to Western Europe when Brexit happened in June 2016. Then they brought it home to the U.S. When Trump won in 2016. And you see the same thing with the lawfare. I mean, Norm Eisen was the main legal hatchet man against Trump here in the U.S. He pioneered that skill set when he was the U.S. ambassador to the Czech Republic from 2011 to 2014. And we've been doing these rule of law sort of CIA Justice Department programs to arrest political opponents ever since the end of the Cold War in Central and Eastern Europe. I just did a video lecture on this just this week. Actually, it was in 1990 when the American Bar Association first started getting millions of dollars from USAID to set up rule of law programs and judicial reform programs in Central and Eastern Europe, and to work with the prosecutors, the judges, to set up the bar associations, to do the law school curriculum. And so, this is something that we pioneered in the primordial soup of Central and Eastern Europe after the Cold War in order to control governments there, in order to get people arrested. And then we brought home against Trump. And now it's now it's in Western Europe right now with the NATO countries. And the fact is the first step to all of this is killing the funding and starving out the networks. And we'll see how much success can be done there.
Yeah, it's truly sick.
I hear every day about the products you all wish MyPillow carried. Well, guess what? We probably do. Slippers, bathrobes, pet beds, blankets, mattresses, sleepwear, loungewear, duvets, comforters, pot holders, aprons, oven mitts, and so much more. And they're all on sale. For example, get our best-selling standard MyPillows for only $14.98. Body pillows, $29.98. 6-piece bath towels or kitchen towel sets, just $29.98. Multi-use MyPillow 2.0s with pillowcase, $9.98. Save $40 on our Spring Percale and Giza Dream bedsheet sets. Any size, any color, and so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save up to 80% on all MyPillow products. And I've never done this before. When you spend $100 or more, you're going to get 2 standard MyPillows absolutely free.
I know you're short on time, and I appreciate you joining us here today, Mike, and making the trek to come on the show. I want to wrap up with something you perhaps know better than maybe even Donald Trump. Election integrity. Tulsi Gabbard, the DNI, comes out this week and says something that we all knew, but Fox paid a $780 million settlement, handing the keys over to Dominion or Smartmatic. I forgot which one it was. J. Alex Halderman, I don't know if you're familiar with the case down in Georgia. It's Raffensperger. What the heck is it? Anyway, they're suing in Georgia. The case is now dismissed from standing, but it was an 8-year-long case. The trial was a year ago, Mike. They dismissed it just about 2 weeks ago, where J. Alex Halderman went in and hacked an election machine in 30 seconds in front of the judge. They come back now a year after the trial and say, well, it's dismissed for standing. Well, you knew that before, what standing was, before you brought the case and had a trial on it. Whatever. But Tulsi Gabbard's out this week now and says that these machines can be hacked. We were told, Mike, for years, Donald Trump's crazy. We're all election deniers, sued, paid lawsuits, still going through litigation. I'm in one of the lawsuits when I worked at Fox, Safford depositions. I'll probably be called as a witness at the trial. I was on the trial list for the last one. They've ruined people's lives. Tucker Carlson was fired. Lou Dobbs was fired. Still being sued. The man's dead. The state's being sued by these companies. But we know that they're vulnerable. I mean, what are we to make of this, Mike, now that an election was stolen? Elections will probably be stolen in the future, but the Democrats don't want to go to something very simple as paper ballot.
Well, there's a lot of angles to this. Almost all of them are somewhere between disturbing and extremely disturbing. I focus really on the censorship side of it and on the foreign policy side of it, rather than because everyone knew these could be hacked.
Yeah.
The Democrats were saying that maybe Trump had won because of vulnerabilities in the voting machines, and there was this whole Kill Chain documentary that was done, and and it was about fears that Trump would win the 2018 midterms because of how insecure the voting machines were. And then we never really saw this campaign to protect the voting machines until the mass mail-in ballot issue with in March 2020, when COVID hit and the CDC said we should vote by mass mail-in ballots, and you'll be tabulated at the end in these voting, and so there's the parts of it that have terrified me have been this rogue network at DHS out of CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, which is just a censorship cell. It was set up to stop Russian hacking because of the, basically everyone thought there were a lot of questions about the murder of Seth Rich.
Oh man!
And then it came out, that thing sort of died down when. The FBI said, actually, we delegated to CrowdStrike, third-party investigation. Of course, that's basically just a DNC intelligence firm.
By the way, do you know Lou Dobbs was sued over Seth Rich as well?
Is that right?
Yeah, they paid out the family of Seth Rich, which to me, this is totally despicable, sued Sean Hannity and Lou Dobbs at Fox News for simply questioning how this man was killed. Yeah. If my parents ever sued a network that was trying to get to the bottom of me being killed, they deserve to go to hell, because, I mean, to worry about money over how your son really died, unless, of course, they were in on it. Now, my lawyer, Ty Clevenger, who I'm sure you're familiar with, who's been following the documents and begging for the laptop, has not gotten the laptop, and now we're under the Trump administration. Why won't they turn over this guy's laptop? But the whole situation, Ty explained to me. Seth Rich's brother came and grabbed his laptop, flew back to Denver with this kid's laptop, who's now dead, his brother. That was the first thing you're worried about. So many red flags, Mike, but nobody cared to ask the questions, and if you did ask the questions, you got sued. Right.
Not a good look. But the fact is CrowdStrike then said, well, actually, the WikiLeaks, because this was what everyone was asking, what Julian Assange himself was publicly saying at the time was when he put out essentially, I think he offered a sum of money for who, if someone came forward and said who, or something to that effect. And so everyone thought these WikiLeaks, these DNC, emails had come from some Seth Rich, and then the FBI contracts CrowdStrike, and I'm not sure if I'm remembering all the details 100%, but effectively, a narrative was born that actually it was Russia, who got these DNC server emails, and so to stop election hacking and the servers of major political parties from being penetrated around election time by Russia, we need to stand up this CISA group inside of this sort of countering cyber hacking group within DHS. come to be run by Chris Krebs, who just lost his security clearance. And, but the fact is, you know, what you're doing there is you're working with hackers from the CIA and NSA, and you know, to stop hackers, you need to be hackers yourself. And this was set up effectively with a hacking group around election software. They then worked with Dominion and Smartmatic and all of those. They were all folded into these sort of CISA working groups. And then CISA ran a parallel operation, probably the single most extensive government censorship operation at that time that had ever existed in the history of mankind, right. You know, targeting tens of millions of tweets. The number one most, the number one category that their web declared as the top misinformation narrative was anything questioning Dominion voting machines.
Right.
So I think in their own files they showed 7.7 million tweets alone that they categorized as misinformation incidents. This is DHS.
Yeah.
You know, and so they're supposed to be set up to protect us from vulnerabilities in the voting machines.
Right.
And while they have that peculiar power to, you know, administer the safety software and whatnot, they are censoring, leading this had 120 people just in this one working group, 120 people full-time censorship work.
Money well spent.
And so this is like if you're the defendant in a trial, you get to pick the judge and jury. You get to censor, and you get to, you know, not only are you the jury deciding whether or not there is or isn't fraud, you're the judge who gets to decide what even gets entered into evidence. And so when you see something like that, you have to switch the burden, and because that structure itself can only exist. I mean, to have that power be held by the same government agency,
right?
That it's not. They don't even have the dignity of structuring it as a separate agency where they're working together.
Right.
It's literally the same very small group of people. And then Chris Krebs came out and said that he hoped that Fox News would be bankrupted by all of this, but then the voting machines play a very strange role in U.S. foreign policy. You look at the State Department and USAID's work with the voting machines, and it's terrifying.
Yeah. The
way these machines are exported. These are private for-profit companies. These are not even NGOs. These guys are making money for it. Look at what happened in Brazil with Bolsonaro.
Right.
State Department, CIA, everyone under the Biden administration wanted Bolsonaro out of office. They ran a massive operation to get him out. Bolsonaro was skeptical of the voting machines. What did they do? They sent the CIA director, Bill Burns, down there 5 months before the election and told him, don't you dare question the results that come from these voting machines 5 months from now.
Yeah.
They sent the head of the Pentagon, Lloyd Austin, threaten members of the Brazilian military and say, don't you dare question the results of this election that's 5 months away. Then the State Department back-channeled with Taiwan Semiconductor in order to divert chips bound for the U.S. during a shortage to Brazil in order to make these custom voting machines that the Brazilian president explicitly didn't want so that they could use electronic voting machines. So we're diverting chips from the U.S. in the midst of a shortage to build electronic voting machines in a foreign country that the foreign country's top leadership says they do not want and do not trust. We are force-feeding it on foreign countries, and I have to ask, why the heck would we do that if these things worked right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. As we wrap up here, do you see any change going into the 2028 election, even the 2026 election? Do you think they'll eventually get us back to paper ballots? Do you think we'll be able to get rid of these things once and for all and make everyone happy, make the Democrats happy? This is, Mike, this is one thing we could all agree on, the left and the right, that we're all against it. Let's do something bilateral.
Well, it was encouraging in Wisconsin, even though I think the Wisconsin court seat went to someone that Elon was and folks were, trying to stop because of how it might gerrymander things and potentially flip the House in for, I believe it was paper ballots, did pass,
Yes.
even in Wisconsin,
Yes.
which is a hard place to win. And
Yep.
so, I think things like that are very encouraging. It's something that, this, we'll see what turns up from. Also, you need to show not just that they are vulnerable, but that there are, you really need to dig into the networks who are administering them. There's been a lot of rumors around various groups from Serbia and other places. These are sort of these contractors, who are, engaged in the various links in the chain. And I think that, the investigation has to touch that as well. But we're in a much better place now than we were previously, but we'll see.
Appreciate you joining us today. Terrific discussion. I wish we had another 4 or 5 hours to take up. Come back soon and talk with us, please.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody, for being with us today here on The Great America Show. We'll see you back here tomorrow for The Great America Show. They're our good friend, the great Roger Stone, where our quest for truth, justice, and the American way continues. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Same time, same place, from the Sunshine State. Until then, may God bless you, may God bless America, and may God bless the great Lou Dobbs. We'll see you tomorrow.